You're watching BBC Newsroom Live. It's 11 a.m. These are the main stories this morning. ITV axes the Jeremy Kyle show following the death of a man who appeared on the programme. ITV's chief executive said the broadcaster has decided to cancel production of the programme permanently, given the gravity of recent events. The government announces another vote on the Prime Minister's Brexit plan in early June, but there's no sign of a breakthrough in cross-party talks. A BBC investigation finds 4 children have been killed by a parent with a history of violence in the last 5 years, after being granted access by a family court.
I was completely naive about the family courts. I assumed that they'd see. To enable a violent man to have a relationship with his children, a contact needed to be supervised.
BAFTA calls on TV shows to have more storylines and references about climate change to help raise awareness of the issue. Good morning, welcome to BBC Newsroom Live. I'm Joanna Gosling. The Jeremy Kyle show has been permanently cancelled by ITV following the death of a participant, 63-year-old Steve Diamond, a week after a programme featuring him was filmed. In a statement released in the last hour, the chief executive of ITV, Carolyn McCall, said, given the gravity of recent events, we've decided to end production of the Jeremy Kyle show. The Jeremy Kyle show has had a loyal audience and has been made by a dedicated production team for 14 years, but now is the right time for the show to end. She added everyone at ITV's thoughts and sympathies are with the family and friends of Steve Diamond. Our entertainment correspondent Lizo Mazimba is outside the ITV studios in central London for us. Lizo, they've acted swiftly with this decision.
Yes, well, we got this news through in the last hour or so, and in the view of many people, it was probably inevitable. It's worth emphasising we don't know all the facts at this stage. ITV's investigation into what happened is still ongoing. There will also be an inquest into the sad death of Steve Diamond, which will try and establish exactly his state of mind and the conditions that led up to his sad death. But even if ITV had completely been exonerated by both their own investigation and by the inquest, over the last day or so, such a light had been shone on Jeremy Kyle by the political world, by people in the media, by the general public, that there was a general feeling that this probably wasn't the kind of show in many people's views that should be on television in the year 2019. So ITV's investigation is still ongoing. They say they will report on that when that actually finishes. We're waiting to see what will happen with the inquest into Steve Diamond, and at some point obviously ITV will announce what will permanently replace the Jeremy Kyle show, but for the time being it's the news that the show, after 14 years, has permanently been taken off the air.
And as you say, Lizo, they're going to have to take some time to work out what will replace it. In the meantime, what is the reaction likely to be to this decision today?
I think there'll be a lot of divided reaction. I think the programme had a loyal viewership. It was ITV's most popular daytime show, so there was clearly an audience for it. But also at the same time, there's a significant number of people who will actually be glad to see the back of the show. They think that whatever the facts in this particular case, so much has been done by the show over the last 14 years and the way it's been done that they disagree with, that it's not the kind of show that should have a place on a channel like ITV in the 21st century, particularly in the way that they use people's conflicts, whether it's with family or issues with addiction or a variety of things, actually using that for what people saw as being just entertainment for people to sit at home and watch. So I think there'll be split reaction. It's loyal viewership, sad to see it go, but at the same time many people out there will think it should have happened sooner.
Thank you, Lizo. Let's bring in Amal Rajan, who's here in the studio. Amal, this is all just happening. They've acted very quickly, haven't they?
They've acted quickly, Joanna, and they've also changed their mind quite quickly. I mean, a lot can happen in 24 hours. This time yesterday, the feeling in ITV was announce an investigation, announce an inquiry, collate the facts, wait for the coroner to give his or her verdict. Something has happened in 24 hours that has made ITV change very, very quickly how it thinks about this show. And having spoken to someone there my sense is a couple of things. One is there is, I think, gathering evidence that the failing of this lie detector test on the episode that was never actually aired was an exceptionally devastating event for Steve Diamond, and the evidence is growing that he was troubled before he went on the show, and that this what he did on the show, willingly or not, he obviously knew what he was getting himself into, but this had a really, really, really appalling impact on him. And I think that there's really deep concern at ITV about how his appearance on the show, which was never actually broadcast, affected him. The second thing is, crudely speaking, seeing ITV all over the front pages this morning for yet another day is really damaging to the brand. And I think it would have weighed heavily on ITV, the thinking of ITV's board, to think that this is potentially going to cause a huge amount of reputational damage to the broadcast at a time when it's trying to reinvent itself creatively and editorially. Having said all that, this is not really about commercial stuff and numbers. This is ultimately a desperately sad personal story of a 63-year-old man who experienced something really quite horrific, and aside from being a personal tragedy for him, I suspect it might become remembered as a sort of key moment in the evolution of British TV culture, because these shows, which dominated our screens in the mornings 15 or 20 years ago, increasingly I think feel out of kilter to lots of people. And although it's a very, very popular show, it was a popular show, big ratings, over 1 million people, solid ratings mid-morning, I think that taking Jeremy Kyle's show off air is the beginning of a movement in TV culture towards saying this kind of exhibitionism is probably not something that necessarily has its place.
So, I mean, obviously no one knows how that may unfold, but what are other programmes that potentially could be affected? I mean, was this kind of the last of that particular type of show?
It was.
Really?
I mean, there's a few other kind of American... this genre, this format, is something that to some extent was imported from America in the late 80s and early 90s. Several of those shows have gone off air. Some of them, when I was growing up, I remember Ricky Lake being on later on in the show. Those seem to have come off air. Jeremy Kyle was a really sort of massive, I mean, to some extent Jeremy Kyle was the personification of this genre within Britain because the show was so big. For ITV, crudely speaking, it's a commercial broadcast, it needs ratings, it sells ads off the back of them. Jeremy Kyle's show did really, really well, and it's important to say that there is, I think, a very significant disconnect here between, on the one hand, people who have wanted the show to be taken off air, who generally don't watch it, and the sort of loyal Heartland audience, over 1 million people who watched it very regularly and for whom it was quite an important part of their daily schedule and an important part of their lives. But ITV now have the, I mean, it's not what they're thinking about straight away, obviously, but they'll have the difficult task of trying to devise something which strikes the right tone. There's a question of whether or not other TV programmes in this country or elsewhere think twice about using lie detectors, which are an instrument or a method which is disputed, I think it's fair to say, in the medical profession. And then there is the fact that we have this ongoing case with Steve Diamond, a 63-year-old who's found dead in his flat on May the 9th, where we don't actually know the circumstances of his death yet fully. But it's just worth reiterating that something about those circumstances, the evidence about those circumstances seems to have weighed very heavily on ITV's mind over the last 24 hours, which is why they've taken the show off air.
The politicians, I was speaking yesterday to Damien Collins of the committee that looks at media issues, was saying that they're discussing today whether they might, what they might look at, and potentially looking at the issue around duty of care. I mean, that's become something that's been looked at anyway, and ITV have been considering it, particularly because of what happened previously with Love Island as well. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, Love Island, there's a couple of things. One, I suppose, Love Island is where there were 2 reported suicides. It's a very different show, it's a different format, albeit ITV. And I suppose there's always a danger that we as journalists have to be very careful in covering suicides because the circumstances around any particular suicide are very, very, very specific. But it is true to say that there are big concerns, not just in traditional TV, but across the sort of media landscape more generally, about the world of influencers and social media, and the fact that lots and lots of people are living their lives in media as this kind of exhibitionism. They're turning their private anguishes and their private considerations into public spectacle. And that's something that parents around the country, teenagers, are thinking an awful lot about. It seems to be a sort of a bigger and bigger part of our culture, even if shows like Jeremy Kyle are sort of coming off the TV schedules. There's an issue here about what Ofcom do about it, because you mentioned duty of care. I spoke to Ofcom yesterday about this whole extremely sad story, And Ofcom say, well, at the moment, there's two things. One is Ofcom is what they call a post-transmission regulator, so it's only after something has gone out on air. Of course, this episode with Steve Diamond never did go out on air. That they really get involved. They're very concerned about being seen as a censor. They don't want to tell people what to do before it goes on air. And the other thing is that Ofcom, which is basically underpinned by a statutory or regulatory code, has pretty advanced instructions when it comes to issues like fairness. Are people treated fairly? And privacy. Do they have are there sort of is there sort of right to privacy being respected? Ofcom has a less developed code, if you like, around duty of care because it's a relatively new area. And I just wonder whether or not this desperately sad event and what happened on Love Island might encourage a kind of another look at whether or not duty of care is something that Ofcom need a more sort of developed approach towards. It's worth finally mentioning in terms of why this decision's happened today. I hope it's never broadcast and I hope people don't see it, but there is going to be footage which may or may not, I don't know, have been seen by senior ITV people of the show that was recorded. And we understand from people that were in the audience that it was the failing of the lie detector test that Steve Diamond experienced caused him to have a very emotional reaction. And I think if you've seen that, if you're aware of that footage and then you're aware of what's happened subsequently, you can see why ITV thought it was probably inevitable that they had to take the show off air permanently today.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you.